Welcome to the Sober and Happy podcast, where we talk about all things recovery related, how to navigate the challenges that we'll face along the way on our journey towards our best lives, and how we could go from living a life of simply just being sober to a life where we're both sober and happy. I remember when I was meeting with the aftercare counselor at my rehab and talking about how to stay sober after leaving rehab. She talked about all the things I needed to remove from my life that could jeopardize my sobriety. After getting home, I began removing people, places, and things that she and other people suggested, and it left a giant void in my life, and I didn't know what to do instead. So what do we do when parts of our sober lives begin to feel empty or boring? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. So buckle up. This is going to be a great episode. Welcome back. One of the first pieces of advice I received in rehab was to remove the things in your life that revolved around drinking. At first, I thought that is simple enough advice to follow, but as I started thinking about everything in my life that involved drinking, I started to panic. I don't know about you, but when I drank, everything in my life revolved around drinking. If there was somewhere I was invited to where I couldn't drink, I simply wasn't going. So as I went through the list in my mind, no more going to sporting events or concert. I have to stop hanging out with about 95% of my friends. I don't think I'd ever gone on a date sober at that point, so is dating off the table now? I was a habitual drinker and driver, so following that advice, I would need to take the bus. Except when I had a suspended license or a DUI and I was riding the bus, I sometimes drank on the bus too. As I went through thing after thing, a wave of depression came over me. I hadn't even had time to mourn giving up alcohol yet, and now I'm being told that I was going to have to also give up everything else in my life? I have to be honest. If I wasn't at a rehab across the country from where I lived at that point, I might have given up then. It was hard enough imagining a life without alcohol, but also a life without many of the other things that I love seemed like too much. Luckily, before throwing in the towel, I found out that the advice that was given to me as a blanket statement was completely false. Unfortunately, I hear similar advice being given all the time to people who are new in recovery. That doesn't mean that we could just give up drinking and expect to stay sober doing the same things with the same people in the same places. We just have to determine what things are most important in our lives and make choices that support a life that will provide us with lasting happiness and joy. Now, this is something I've learned over many years of sobriety. I've made many mistakes along the way in the process of learning this. There were some things that I refused to give up initially. I still wanted to go to my old bar and shoot in pool tournaments on Thursday nights, which I did do after getting out of rehab. Now, I managed to survive a few times doing that, but even though I white-knuckled through those nights and managed not to drink, just going there seemed to kick off a temptation to drink that often lasted days. Then after that failed experiment and having an increased fear of relapsing, I went the completely opposite direction and pretty much avoided everything. My life consisted of going to work, going to meetings, and going home. That, my friends, is a recipe for sobriety that is boring as hell. Even more dangerous, that kind of living can start to create resentment for being sober, and that is where I found myself at about a year sober. The problem was that I wasn't filling my life up with any reasons not to drink. I wasn't getting out and enjoying life. I was just sitting around being pissed about being sober. I was talking to another sober friend about this and was complaining about my boring life, all the things I couldn't do, and he interrupted me. He looked at me and said, "You know your happiness is your own responsibility, right?" The thing is, in the mindset I was in at that point of my sobriety, I honestly didn't. I removed so much from my life and created such a huge void and was just sitting back expecting the universe to fill it in for me. This also was a sober friend who was enjoying his life to the fullest. He wasn't allowing his past problems with drinking to hold him back from doing the things he enjoyed. He was going to concerts, sporting events, and several other things that I couldn't do anymore. I asked him how he was able to do it. He explained that he didn't just quit drinking and continue doing whatever he wanted. He took time and built a strong foundation. He had a strong connection to why he wanted to continue to live a sober life. Then he decided he could start introducing some of the things he loved that he stopped doing back into his life. The first time or two, he often would go with someone who supported him being sober, but he realized after time that he could enjoy these activities without worrying about being around alcohol. At that time, the message I was hearing in much of my recovery circle was that the second I let my guard down, I was going to be in trouble. I looked at going to places where I used to drink and being around other people drinking as letting my guard down. But at that point in my sobriety, that wasn't the case. This wouldn't be letting my guard down. I was creating a very isolated and empty life by eliminating everything. Doing things that I enjoy would be me deciding that alcohol would no longer have power over my life. This would be embracing life. That weekend, I sat down and started writing some lists. I listed out all the things I used to enjoy that I am no longer doing now that I got sober. Then as I looked at that list, I asked myself which things on that list are still important to me. That Thursday night pool tournament at the bar that I mentioned earlier was on my list. However, I realized that I had changed a lot over the past year, and I no longer had the desire to be around a bunch of drunk people, listening to the same bar gossip, and waiting for my next turn to shoot pool. Then there were some other items on my list I still wanted to do, but realized there would need to be some changes in how I do that activity. For example, I loved camping. However, camping trips my whole adult life often consisted of going with a bunch of drinking buddies, finding a camping spot, and drinking the entire weekend. The idea of being the only sober person in an entire campsite of people getting drunk for a whole weekend did not appeal to me. To be honest, I didn't even know if I would enjoy camping sober, but there was only one way to find out. So I went camping. I found out I still love camping. I will occasionally go with family members here in Arizona, but I found that I enjoy going camping in very remote places by myself the most. It is what I do when things are starting to get a little overwhelming and I need a weekend to disconnect from all the noise around me and reconnect with myself. I kept going down the list. I crossed off some items, changed other things around, and also added things that I've been wanting to try. Then, the most important part, I got out and started doing things. I took his advice and I would go with supportive friends the first couple of times. My first concert was with some other friends in recovery. As with most things on my list when I first started doing this, the first time was pretty uncomfortable. Beer stands were everywhere. People were drinking all around me, and the reminders of many drunk concerts I've been to were on my mind. But the uncomfortableness was not a temptation to drink for me. At that point, I'd been sober for a while, had a strong foundation and a good support group with me, and had not had a strong desire to drink for a while. The uncomfortableness was rooted in the fear that was instilled in me that I might be letting my guard down, and by me facing my fear, I was already working through it. As time went on, trying new things was not as hard. Slowly, I began to fill that void that was left when I removed so many things from my life when I got sober. Now, as I talk about filling your life up with reasons not to drink, this is not just about doing things. The most important reasons to not drink are often people and not things or activities. The biggest reason will be our why for not drinking. A strong connection to this is the number one factor I see for people who stay sober and for those who continue to struggle. If you're struggling to stay sober or sober currently but simply are not happy, I want you to do something right now. I want you to think of your reason for being sober. Now I want you to sit and try to feel that reason. That feeling needs to be stronger than the feeling that you get inside when you're tempted to drink. If it isn't, the first thing I want you to do is take some time and reconnect with your why. I talk about my process of doing this in episode number 2 of this podcast if you would like to see how I was able to do that. As we continue to stay sober, our why will shift and other reasons will be added on. The reason is fluid and should always be growing and getting stronger. And contrary to the advice that is given often in the recovery world, you don't have to get sober for yourself. Whatever reason you have that is strong enough for you to start is good enough, and don't let anybody tell you otherwise. For me, I hated myself so much when I was in the depths of my addiction that I thought the whole world would be better off if I just killed myself. No part of me felt that I was worthy of a better life, so there was no chance I could have gotten sober for myself at that point. But my mom deserved to stop suffering watching her son drink himself to death, and that was a good enough reason for me to start. But that is not the only reason I stay sober today. As I started filling my life up with meaningful relationships, both new ones and old ones that I started to repair, each one of those relationships contributed to my why. I have 3 nieces here in Arizona that I did not meet until after I got sober, so they have never seen me drink. They only know this version of me, and we have developed amazing relationships that I would never think of jeopardizing by returning to my old way of living. I could proudly say today that I'm an amazing son, uncle, brother, friend, employee, and all-around good person. I may have not been a strong enough reason for me to quit drinking. However, through growing, healing, and changing, I am a person today that I know is worthy of an amazing life. I have filled my life over the last 12 years with so many reasons not to drink that the idea of drinking today is ridiculous to me. That doesn't mean I don't have times that life could be incredibly challenging. It doesn't mean that I don't still struggle with anxiety, depression, self-doubt, insecurities, or dealing with people that simply piss me off at times. But there is nothing that could happen to me today that could make me drink. It wasn't always that way though, and it only happened when I cleared away the things that no longer serve me, made room for things that fill my life with joy, and went out and found those things. That is what I want for you. There is a life possible for you that is so amazing that all desire to drink or use will simply evaporate, because you too could have a life that is so full of reasons not to drink that the idea of drinking will also feel ridiculous for you. That is the life that is possible for you. That is the life that you deserve. So go out and start chasing it as hard as you used to chase your addiction. I promise you, it will be worth it. Thank you for listening to this episode, and I hope you're enjoying the podcast. This week, I want you to think of one person that you think will benefit from listening to this episode and send it to them. Be the person who plants a positive seed in someone else's life today. You never know how much it could impact them. New episodes come out each Friday, so I look forward to connecting with you next week. And as always, thank you so much for listening, and keep living sober and happy.